The MTA tells us, ride inside, stay alive. It's a slogan meant to reassure, a promise carved into still in routine. But what if I told you there were moments, two disasters, where that slogan twisted into something darker? Where staying inside wasn't survival, but a sentence. Where the crash wasn't outside the train, but inside. This is the story of the J and the 4. Two collisions that turned safety into irony and slogans into epitaphs. Before we start the video, I want to shout out Meej, who has participated in assistance of creating the very thumbnail for this video. Without his interference, I never had a clear idea of what the original thumbnail would be. Now let's jump into action. We begin with the 1995 Williamsburg bridge crash. It's June 4th, 11:38 p.m. The operator Leighton Gibson and the conductor of the J train go on duty. Their assignment, 3 round trips from Jamaica Center in Queens to Broad Street in Manhattan. Routine and predictable, just another night in the rails. The conductor later testified the first 2 trips were made in the proper manner, and that nothing was out of the ordinary. Emphasis on was, because in the world of transit, was is a fragile word. It means the calm existed, but didn't last. The J train before the wreck was gliding from Queens into Brooklyn in its usual rhythm. Speeds proper, station stops routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But that word was is fragile, because ordinary only lasts until the rails decided otherwise. Pulling out of Kosciuszko Street, Gibson and his crew were forced to wait at the junction, held back by an M train. That M train itself departed at 5:48 a.m., its operator later insisting every stop was uneventful. Every move by the book, 8 cars long, 2 men in charge. The M rolled out of Metropolitan Avenue right on schedule. By the time the M reached Marcy Avenue, the last stop before the Williamsburg Bridge, the M was shadowing a slow work train. 30 car lengths ahead, its silhouette was clear, visible and undeniable. The stage was set, one train waiting, another following, and a fragile system about to be tested. What was routine was about to collapse into history. Keep in mind the Williamsburg Bridge infrastructure is as narrow as the IRT's elevated. So the M crept into the bridge, crawling behind the work train. Red signals forced him to stop more than once, until he finally held his train at signal J2-120. But here's this problem. Despite all these abnormalities, the M train operator never radioed the command center. Not once. New York City Transit's operating rulebook required it. Every unusual stop, every irregularity had to be reported. He didn't, and because he didn't, that silence would later backfire terribly. What looked like minor delays became the cracks that set the stage for disaster. Meanwhile, the J train stopped at Lorimer Street to pick up several passengers, among them an off-duty MTA train operator heading to work. He even once waved at Gibson, who was awake and alert. Once again, keep that emphasis on was, because in these stories, was is the word that marks the line between calm and collapse. After the brief interaction, the off-duty operator took a seat near the front of the lead car, diagonally across from Gibson's compartment. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just another ride. At 6:10 a.m., the J train left Marcy Avenue. The conductor moved to the third car's compartment to relax. Gibson at the controls handled the train like anyone else would, accelerating steadily, pushing the 8-car consist uphill, routine, normal, ordinary, and yet ordinary was about to end. Meanwhile, after the conductor's announcement on board the M train, a New York City Transit road car inspector traveling to work stood up, preparing to get off at Essex Street. He glanced through the storm door into the last car, and there it was, the J train, speeding towards them. From his position in the next to last car, He couldn't make out Gibson himself, nor judge the exact speed, but from his point of view, it was coming fast, at least 30 miles per hour. What about the M train? The M train sat frozen at signal J2-120. The J train barreled past a yellow caution at J2-130, running about 34 to 36 miles per hour. The red at J2-128 tripped the emergency brake as designed, but it wasn't enough. The block was only 270 feet long, and the J couldn't stop in time. Still met still. The J slammed into the rear of the M, which was sitting just 16 feet beyond signal J2/125. In that instant, routine became wreckage. The J train operator failed to act because he was asleep when he passed the red signal. And in the Williamsburg bridge, where signals sit close together, there was no room for error. The emergency brake engaged, but the train simply didn't have the distance to stop. At 6:18 in the morning, the J slammed into the rear of the M at just 20 miles per hour. But in the narrow span of the bridge, even 20 was enough to crush steel. The motorman's cab telescoped into the frame, mangled beyond recognition. In that instant, he was killed instantly on impact. The driver. Routine became wreckage. Ordinary became fatal. The steel compressed inward, leaving no survivable space. Gibson's demise was so extreme that news reports avoided describing it. In reality, the cab's collapse meant bones breaking under compression. The chest cavity crushed, fatal trauma to the head and neck with no protective void. Survival was physically impossible. When the steel finally stopped screaming, the bridge fell into silence, broken only by sirens. 54 passengers were injured, some carried down the wreckage suspended above the East River, and in the end, the sole fatality was motorman Layden Gibson. But something's off about the story. How did investigators automatically know he was asleep? To some, this may sound like a stupid question. Maybe because he had already done 2 trips from Jamaica Center to Broad Street. You could speculate he just happened to doze off at that moment. But if he was awake, he most likely would have manually stopped at the yellow signal, and if the J still appeared to run too close towards the M, he probably would have busted out the door and told people sitting to get up and brace for impact. He could have had more than enough time, even if he wasn't paying attention, to get out of the cab, because the emergency brakes would have been activated, so he wouldn't have to worry about manually handling the throttle. He could have had at least 10 seconds max to warn everyone to brace for impact. But even if he was alert, I doubt that he thought the crash would be anticlimactic, because it was still going 20 miles per hour. That's how slow the emergency braking systems were. In the days that followed, grief turned to anger. Gibson's family sued the MTA, claiming negligence, that the system failed him, as much as he had failed the signal. Passengers too sought justice, demanding accountability for the injuries they carried away from the wreck. But investigators uncovered a deeper truth. The Williamsburg Bridge was guarded by a 77-year-old signal system at the time, too antique to enforce safety. The red light tripped the emergency brake, but the train was already too close and fast. 20 miles per hour was enough to crush steel and end a life in the most gruesome way possible. South 4th Street was supposed to be the future, a grand junction under the Williamsburg Bridge that would have untangled the J and M, freed trains from century-old switches, and given New York a modern artery. Basically the J train, but underground with 4 tracks, similar to I&D Fulton Street. For a deeper dive about South 4th Street, I happen to have a video in regards to that topic. The link in the description will be shown. But it was never built. And so, in 1995, the J train was still bound to a 19th century elevated, signals untouched for 80 years, a bottleneck that punished motormen with impossible margins. Leighton Gibson, suspended only once in 14 years, was nearly a perfect motorman. He did not deserve to die in a cab crushed by steel. The MTA failed him, its riders, and to build a system that might have rewritten his fate. One of the sole reasons why this incident occurred is MTA's unreasonable rule to let the M train invade into the J train space, delaying riders. This all happened because an M just had to get in the way. And even if that M never existed, the crash would have been less catastrophic. Gibson might have hit the work train instead, or that work train would already be exiting Essex Street by the time he tripped in the red signal. It's absolutely ridiculous how M trains are allowed to invade the J when they're the slower local lines and never think twice about touching the middle track. Don't even get me started on that idiotic grade junction at Myrtle Avenue. And for those who still don't understand, I'm going to play a clip of a J train rider's daily struggles.
Passengers will be having an M train cross ahead of us. Once it clears, we'll get moving again. Thank you for your patience.
As you can see in the clip, the J train announcer literally says the M is allowed to pass first. But the J could go straight, speed up at least 20 miles per hour, and head to the local track en route to Kosciuszko Street, barely delaying the M at all. But instead, the M shares space with the J and exploits it, crossing from a junction it doesn't even belong to. That move doesn't just delay J trains via Queens, it delays J trains heading back into Manhattan. Every time it crosses whenever a J is nearby, it's basically saying F you. And the worst part, the M crawls in that sharp curve, dragging time out even longer. Sometimes I just wish the crash happened at Myrtle Avenue just so MTA could finally pay attention to how much harm the M train's junction does in Brooklyn. All because MTA failed to build South 4th Street, riders have wasted not just one day, but possibly 30 years of time that could have been saved. Also, if you watch the video further, each time a J Express and an M Local both heading to Queens enter the same platform, you hear the announcer in the J saying they have to let the M pass first. Every single time. You can see why I'm upset here. MTA is ignorantly repeating the same issue that caused the Williamsburg wreck. And what do? They allow the M to pass, basically saying F Gibson's legacy. Now you can argue that nobody knew this was coming from the M's perspective, but that's the point. The system sets up collisions of fate, giving priority to the slower local, forcing the faster express to wait, and erasing the lessons of tragedy. It's not just efficiency. It's history repeating itself disguised as scheduling. And this calls for a why the M is worse than you think video. But this isn't the topic. There must be a new operation. If a Manhattan-bound M blocks the J should automatically have a general operation to switch to the express tracks, skipping 3 stations from Myrtle to Marcy. That would give the J enough distance to stay ahead, and enough time to escape the choke, and enough time to prevent another tragedy. Before we move on to the next topic, I have a burning question. Who unsubscribed at 2000? One moment I'm celebrating the milestone, the next it's 1997, and then 1991. If you were one of these rage baiters, you better hope you're not on the guest list when Jesus comes back, because that unsubscribe button might count as eternal judgment. Speaking of somebody bound for eternal judgment, let's go into detail of the 4 train wreck. His name, Robert E. Ray. A name morally tangled in controversy within the MTA community, and you are about to see why. Hours before Union Square, the warning signs were already flashing, much before the incident itself occurred. In the Bronx, Ray overshot past 2 stations, forcing the train to back up so passengers could get off. The ride was erratic, the stop sloppy, the crowd restless. One rider once shouted into the cab, "Stop fooling around," a plea that hung in the air like prophecy. But Ray didn't listen. The recklessness that began uptown was only gathering speed, and by midnight, it would carry him and his train straight into catastrophe. Riders claimed his driving style was unnecessarily fast, uneasy, and reckless, with a rhythm more disconnected than Patrick's chromosomes. The train lurched through stations with chaos instead of control. Every stop rattled nerves, every surge of speed pulled the crowd tighter into fear. What should have been routine was already unraveling, and the passengers knew it before the crash ever came. But now it's August 28th. 1991, 4 years prior to the J-Train wreck. Around 12 in the morning, Ray began his psychotic drive down to Brooklyn on Lexington. But as soon as he was north of 14th Street, he hit a switch that functioned normally, designed for a maximum of 12 miles per hour. He drove 54 miles per hour through it, and you think it'd just leave a mark. But instead, here's what actually happened. The train jumped the tracks, still ripped through the cars. 5 lives were lost. What began as a Bronx overshoot ended as one of the deadliest crashes in Manhattan. The wreck was chaos, steel beams slicing through cars, passengers trapped, the tunnel echoing with screams. The first car was mangled beyond recognition, but the driver himself completely fine. And Robert E. Ray, standing there at the cab, looked around at the carnage and basically said, "Ah, hell no, I'm out of here." Then he vanished into the Bronx. So you mean to tell me he clocked out right after performing one of the MTA's deadliest crashes in subway history, after treating the switch like Sonic tearing across that random football field, outrunning it so fast he caused a global shortage. He just vanished like the Avatar. But unfortunately for Ray, reality chased him. He thought his next stop would be the Bronx. Instead, it was prison. He was arrested at his home where cops already were waiting for him, and then later taken to a Manhattan police station for questioning. While this goes on, the cab is searched.
You've got half of Mexico in here! This is insane. This guy wasn't just sipping on Corona, he was marinating in it.
Empty crack vials clatter to the floor. 3 beer bottles roll out, and the toxicology later shows his blood alcohol at .21, more than double the legal limit at the time. He wasn't just off balance. He was orbiting another planet, possibly a few miles towards Neptune. And all it took was a drug-addled mortal man to cause the MTA's equivalent of 9/11. A catastrophe born not of still failure, but of human neglect. The MTA most likely never checked his background or asked what he'd been through. They'll just hire anybody. Runaway Robert became a legend, a villain whose only superpower was running away, busted immediately after trying to gaslight the world. Under state law, .10 is already considered intoxicated. Ray was more than double the threshold, drunk enough to kill. The commissioner said Robert admitted to having 3 beers after the crash, in the 5 hours before he was picked up. But who was he fooling? Investigators stated 3 beers would not give him that amount of alcohol in his blood. He wasn't just sipping Corona, he was marinating in it. It's no secret he was lit before he even touched the throttle. Why would MTA even allow somebody in the first place to check in drunk? A system so blind it let disaster clock in for a shift. So he was obviously charged for manslaughter. It wasn't just about the booze, it was about his reckless behavior, speeding, driving the train like it was a bumper car, treating Union Square like Daytona Speedway. He treated a simple turn like a Buffalo driver would. Investigators showed he was intoxicated and had fallen asleep, causing the crash, and he was released from prison in 2002. But there's also a deeper story to this, an overlooked detail that's been bothering me, in regards to a deeper dive of his personal life. Some retrospective accounts and urban retellings claim Runaway Robert went crazy because his wife wouldn't let him see his 2 children. You can never let anyone, including a woman, no matter how crazy she is, turn you from nice guy Jim into crackhead Arnold, pounding back more beer than Thor himself could endure. Either he was born crazy, or he lived in a world where his girlfriend was overly abusive and turned him into an alcoholic. And so, Runaway Robert became legend, a man who let chaos at a home spill into chaos underground, clocking out of reality and leaving Union Square in ruins. But let's shift the blame for a second. Maybe she was abusive. Maybe she did keep them locked out of their lives. But this is pure speculation. And even if it's true, it's no excuse and it doesn't justify the 5 people who were killed. As a father, his children more than likely meant the world to him. But Robert went so drunk that night, he poured his trauma into his job and 5 people paid the price. 5 passengers crushed in half from the folded Ford train. Robert's overshooting was more than just recklessness. It was a desperate cry for help. He thought no one cared, and the fear of never seeing his children again drove him into madness. That weight broke his focus, and in the cab he drifted, lost into a daydream. A moment of silence became catastrophe, and the rails carried his despair straight into disaster. Whatever chaos lived in Ray's personal life, he carried it into the cab. Union Square became the stage for his breakdown. If nobody had died, it would have been another bizarre story. There is another story here. We can't let trauma control us, and we have to be sure of the people who are actually around. As crazy and morally incorrect it sounds, I only have 10% of pity for this guy, only because he didn't know how to control his trauma. The record says alcohol and still. The retelling says loneliness and loss. Maybe Ray wasn't just drunk. Maybe he was broken. The thought of never seeing his children again could have been the shadow of chasing him down Lexington. And in that shadow, he sped, he overshot, and he crashed. The system judged his speed, but history ignored his cries. Nobody has lived happily without challenges. The difference is how you face them. Robert poured his pain into the throttle of a subway train, and 5 people died because of it. Families were waiting for those passengers, but they never came home. Trauma is real, but it's also a test. And like I said earlier, he failed it in the most catastrophic way possible. But decades after Union Square, Runaway Robert was struck down by irony itself. In 2015, he was hit by a truck at 37 miles per hour in the Bronx, left with a fractured skull and a broken leg. Witnesses said he looked intoxicated, as if history had looped back on him. The man who once fled a wreck became the wreck. And then silence. Born in 1953, his story faded into mystery right after 2015. A villain whose only superpower was running away, finally caught by the universe's own punchline. A reminder that the dead souls he took forgave but never forgot. Runaway Robert wasn't just a villain. He was a man broken by life. Sad he couldn't see his children, crushed by prison, ignored by the city. After the crash, after the hit and run, there was no medical help and no restoration. New York City doesn't care about the mentally ill. And so the man who once drove into the train, into Union Square, may now wander the very subways he destroyed. Unseen, unrecognized, a ghost among us. The deeper we dive into his story, the sadder it gets. He failed his test, but the system failed him too. What oddly parallels Robert E. Ray with Gibson's fate is that both were failed by the system. One died but didn't deserve it. The other stayed alive but in many eyes deserved the fate of Gibson. Gibson was crushed by circumstance, a victim of neglect. Ray was spared, but carried his chaos into Union Square, leaving 5 dead and 216 people injured. 2 men, 2 outcomes, both shaped by a system that didn't care. One became a ghost of tragedy, the other a villain of parody. And together their stories remind us that when the system fails, it doesn't break individuals. It breaks also families, cities, and history itself. In speculation, I could be dead wrong about this. I've done some serious digging, since there is very little information about his personal life. You may say this video is way too long, but that's the point. Nobody has ever done a deeper dive into what could have gone wrong. The length isn't filler, it's the excavation. Every minute pulls back another layer of chaos, another overlooked detail, another piece of the system that failed. Short clips skim the surface. This one digs into the wreckage. Because only by going long can you see how the disaster was built.